Maybe he finally saw me, not just as a black soldier, not as a burden, but as a man who fought beside him. They say you never forget the sound of incoming artillery, the scream in the sky, the moment where the air itself splits, the heartbeat of silence right before the world explodes. But what haunts me more isn't the sound, it's the silence. My name is Corporal James Halloway, 29th Infantry Division, Normandy, 1944. By then I'd seen my share of hell. The hedgerows, the villages reduced to rubble, the mud that swallowed boots and the stench of smoke that clung to everything we owned. But nothing prepared me for that night outside St. Lo when silence itself became the enemy. We'd been ordered to dig in along a ridge overlooking a crossroads, a place of no consequence on any map. But command said it mattered. We didn't ask why. In the army, you don't ask, you dig. And so we dug. Shallow foxholes in the hard French earth, sweat mixing with the dirt, rifles never more than an arm's reach away. The men were restless. Some smoked, some prayed. I just stared at the horizon, watching the last light of day fade into a gray that felt more like ash than sky. That's when I noticed it. The birds had stopped. The distant crack of rifles had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The world had gone still. Too still. I felt it in my chest before I heard it. The kind of silence that presses on you, that makes you look at your brothers and know you're already dead. You just don't know when the shell will drop. And that's when I realized the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. And before I take you deeper into that night, I'll ask you this. If stories like these matter to you, stories that carry the weight of the men who never came home, then subscribe to this channel, share it, because too often silence buries more than artillery ever could. Now, let me tell you what happened when the silence broke. The quiet pressed down on us heavier than the mud clinging to our boots. It wasn't just silence, it was a silence that listened. We were dug in along the hedgerows, rifles resting against sandbags, eyes straining at shadows that never moved. Every man knew what was coming. We'd seen it before. The Germans didn't always lead with fire, they led with waiting. I crouched low in the foxhole, fingers drumming against the stock of my Garand. The wood was slick from the damp, my palms raw from digging all day. To my left, Sergeant Mills spat into the mud and muttered, "They're zeroing us, Carter, just waiting for the right moment to open hell." I didn't answer. He didn't expect me to. Mills never wasted words on me unless it was an order or a warning. Some of the men joked with each other, swapped smokes, even cracked nervous laughs. But when their eyes drifted to me, the talking died down. I wasn't just another rifle. I was the reminder that not all of us wore the same skin beneath the uniform. Still, I carried my weight. More than my weight. I knew it, and so did they. But knowing and saying are two different things. Preacher, the only one who treated me like a brother, sat on the edge of the foxhole, his Bible tucked into his jacket. "Stay sharp," he whispered, not to me specifically, but loud enough for all of us. "When it's this quiet, the devil's just loading his guns." He wasn't wrong. The silence grew heavier until even the crickets stopped. The air turned brittle, like it might shatter with the first shell. I pressed my helmet down tighter and let my eyes trace the tree line ahead. Somewhere out there, men we couldn't see were drawing maps in the dirt, plotting arcs and ranges. Somewhere out there, steel was waiting for us, already cut and measured. I thought of home, Georgia Clay, my mama's voice in the kitchen, the way people back there still crossed the street when I walked by in uniform. Even in khaki, even with a rifle, I wasn't the same as the others. And maybe that's why I swore to myself I wouldn't let them forget me here. Not in this silence, not when the sky broke open. And just as that thought burned through me, the first distant whistle cut the night air. The shells were coming. The first shell hit short of the line, throwing dirt and branches skyward. The sound wasn't just loud. It was a punch in the chest, a scream in the bones. Before the echoes died, a second one landed closer, the ground bucking beneath us like the earth itself wanted to spit us out. "Down!" Mills roared, shoving his helmet deeper over his brow. Men flattened against the mud, arms covering their heads as though steel could be warded off by a prayer in a tin pot. I pressed myself into the foxhole, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. The barrage had begun. Each whistle overhead was a warning, each explosion a verdict. And between them, the silence. That awful silence that gave you just enough time to wonder if the next one had your name carved into it. Preacher clutched his Bible to his chest, lips moving fast. His voice was drowned in the chaos, but I didn't need to hear the words. I knew them. I'd whispered them myself back when I was a boy. The world narrowed to fire and dirt. Shells shredded trees, splinters stabbing into men who hadn't even been touched by shrapnel. One blast caved in a dugout 2 positions down. Men screamed, buried alive. I wanted to run, to dig, to do anything, but Mills's voice cut through the smoke. Stay put. Keep your heads down. It'll pass. But it never just passed. Every man felt it, that fear that we weren't just being shelled. We were being tested, softened. That when the last whistle faded, what came next would be worse. I gripped my rifle, knuckles white. The ground shook. My ears rang. And in the middle of it all, my thoughts drifted. Back home. Back to Georgia, back to the whispers that followed me into every diner, every corner store. Why's he wearing that uniform? Ain't his war. They were wrong. This was my war. My blood, my breath, my story, same as any man beside me. And if the artillery wanted to erase me, bury me under mud and steel, I swore I'd make damn sure the world remembered my name first. The barrage built to a crescendo. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Silence. But not the same silence as before. This one wasn't waiting. It was promising. Promising what was about to come through the smoke. The silence after the last shell was deafening. My ears rang, my chest heaved, and for a moment all I could hear was my own heartbeat hammering in the cage of my ribs. Then came the sound we all feared. Boots. Hundreds of them. The ground trembled beneath their march, muffled by the fog that clung to the battlefield. The artillery hadn't been the end. It had been the drum roll. "Eyes front!" Mills barked, his voice raw. Men scrambled to their positions, rifles shaking in their hands. Bayonets glinted faint in the gray light as we leveled them over the parapet. I peered through the haze, my stomach twisting. Shadows moved within the smoke. Dozens, then hundreds, shifting like the forest itself had come alive. German helmets caught the dim light, rifles gleamed, and then came the guttural shouts. Orders, commands. The charge was coming. "Hold!" Mills hissed. "Hold till you see them!" My finger brushed the trigger of my Garand, the steel slick with sweat. Around me, men whispered prayers, curses, promises. Preacher's lips moved faster, his Bible clutched tight in one hand, rifle in the other. Then, like a wave breaking, they surged from the smoke. Gray coats, bayonets, faces twisted in determination. They filled the horizon, pouring forward, firing as they ran. "Fire!" Mills roared. The line erupted. Rifles cracked, machine guns rattled. Tracers cut glowing lines through the smoke. Germans stumbled, fell, but more came behind them, stepping over their bodies, relentless. The air filled with the reek of gunpowder and blood. I fired again and again, the recoil jarring through my shoulder, the clip ejecting with its sharp metallic ping. I slammed another in, breath ragged, eyes stinging with smoke. A German collapsed just feet from our wire, his bayonet stabbing empty air. "Reload! Keep them back!" Mills shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the roar. Fear pressed at the edges of my mind, whispering that we couldn't hold, that the artillery had broken us more than we knew. But then I glanced at Preacher, at his dark hands steady on the rifle, his voice still murmuring even as bullets whipped past. I thought of the weight we carried, not just for ourselves, but for every man who doubted we belonged here. So I planted my boots, chambered another round, and swore we would not break. Because if this silence before the artillery had been terrifying, the silence after we fell would be worse. The Germans hit the wire with a sound I'll never forget, a tearing metallic shriek as cutters snapped through the strands. Men threw themselves against it, climbing, tumbling, pushing through gaps. Our machine guns stitched lines of fire, mowing them down, but more poured in, filling every space the fallen left behind. "Fix bayonets!" Mills bellowed, his voice hoarse. Steel clicked into place along the trench. Rifles became spears, and suddenly the distance between us and them was gone. One leapt over the sandbags, his eyes wild, bayonet aimed at my chest. I swung my rifle up, steel meeting steel, the clash ringing in my bones. We grappled, boots slipping in the mud, his breath hot and sour against my face. For a moment I thought I'd be the one falling. Then Preacher was there, rifle butt smashing into the German's skull, sending him crumpling into the muck. "Stay with me, Eli," he shouted, pulling me up. His eyes blazed, not just with survival, but with something more. A refusal to let this be where we were written off. The trench became chaos. Shadows wrestled in the fog, screams blending with gunfire, the world a blur of mud, blood, and desperation. Mills fought like a man possessed, his pistol barking until it clicked empty, then swinging a shovel like it was a saber. Everywhere I looked, death was inches away. Wilson fell with a bayonet in his side, gasping, clutching at me as I dragged him behind cover. A grenade landed near us. I kicked it away, the blast shaking the earth as dirt and fire rained down. Through it all, the thought pounded in my head. We were holding the line not just for ourselves, but for every man back home who doubted we deserved to be here. If we broke, they'd say it proved their whispers right. So I fought harder. Harder than I thought a man could. My arms ached, my lungs burned, my vision swam. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not while the silence before the barrage still echoed in my bones, reminding me what waited if we failed. And as the Germans pressed closer, as their shouts filled the trench, I realized something with terrible clarity. The artillery hadn't been meant to kill us. It had been meant to break us so the charge could finish what the shells had started. But they hadn't broken us yet. Not me. Not Preacher. Not the men who still stood shoulder to shoulder in this pit of hell. We weren't fighting for victory anymore. We were fighting to prove we could not be erased. The trench had become a slaughterhouse. Men screamed, rifles cracked, steel clashed against steel. The fog glowed with muzzle flashes, each burst revealing faces twisted in fury or fear. The Germans pressed harder, bayonets lunging, grenades tumbling. Preacher fired point blank into a man climbing the sandbags, then slammed the butt of his rifle into another's jaw. He was breathing heavy, his lips moving in prayer even as blood spattered his helmet. "Lord, don't let them take us quiet, not tonight." I fought beside him, rifle hot in my hands, bayonet slick with mud and blood. My arms ached, my legs burned, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop. Every time a German fell into the trench, I saw more than an enemy. I saw every sneer I'd endured back in uniform, every boy muttered under breath, every letter home I'd written for white comrades whose families would welcome them with open arms, while mine would get a folded flag and a whisper. Mills roared orders, voice raw, his uniform ripped and bloodied. He fought like a man who refused to die, sitting down, swinging his shovel like a scythe, clearing the trench one body at a time. His presence alone held us together even when the line wavered. But the enemy was relentless. They kept coming, filling every gap, forcing us back step by step. Wilson lay groaning against the wall, clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. I dropped beside him, pressing a bandage into the wound. His eyes searched mine wide, terrified. Don't let them finish us, Eli." "I won't," I told him, though my voice cracked. "You hear me? I won't." Overhead, the sky trembled with a low, distant rumble. Not thunder, not this time. It was deeper, steadier. Artillery, ours. "Back! Take cover!" Mills bellowed. We threw ourselves into the mud as the shells screamed over us, tearing into the German lines. The earth shook. Fire blossomed, and for a heartbeat the trench lit up like day. Screams rose from the fog, guttural and broken. The noose had loosened, but lying there, face pressed into the muck, I realized the truth. The barrage hadn't come to save us. It had come to bury the enemy, and maybe us with them. Command didn't care if the shells tore our trench apart along with theirs. We were expendable. I lifted my head, ears ringing, dirt raining down on my helmet. Preacher met my eyes, his lips still moving, his rifle still clutched tight. "We hold," I said, though my voice was barely more than a whisper. And as the shells kept falling, as the trench shook with fury, I swore to myself, if we were going to be forgotten by history, it wouldn't be because we broke. It would be because we fought until the silence itself shattered. The barrage rolled on, deafening and merciless. Each shell ripped chunks of earth and flesh into the air, turning the fog into a storm of fire. The trench walls shook, dirt collapsing in cascades. Men screamed, not just the enemy this time, but our own, crushed under mud, shrapnel, or fear itself. I crawled toward Wilson, dragging him deeper into what little cover we had left. His breath came ragged, eyes glassy. "Stay with me," I begged, pressing harder on the wound. Blood soaked through the bandage, hot against my freezing hands. Preacher crouched beside us, his face smeared with mud and soot. He wasn't praying anymore, he was shouting, his voice rising against the roar. God ain't gonna hear us if we're silent, Eli. Make 'em hear us. Mills staggered through the haze, one arm hanging limp, uniform torn. He barked orders through gritted teeth, dragging men back into position. For all his venom earlier, for all the weight he piled on me because of the color of my skin, he was still there, still fighting. And in that moment, I couldn't hate him. The barrage eased, just for a breath. The silence that followed was worse than the thunder. Smoke rolled low over the churned earth. Figures stumbled out of it, Germans dazed, bleeding but alive. And they weren't retreating. They were regrouping. I raised my rifle, sighted down the barrel. My hands shook, but not from fear. From rage. Rage at the Germans charging again. Rage at Command, who had aimed the artillery without caring if it killed us too. Rage at Mills and every man who'd ever looked at me like I was less, even as I bled the same mud. On me! I shouted louder than I thought my lungs could bear. We hold this trench or we die in it. But we don't go quiet. The men answered with fire. Rifles cracked, grenades sailed, the trench lit up again in chaos. I fired until my shoulder burned, until the recoil bruised bone. Preacher fought like a man possessed. Wilson groaned but kept a hand on his rifle, and Mills swung his pistol until it clicked empty. The Germans faltered. For the first time they faltered. Smoke and silence swallowed the battlefield once more, and in that silence I understood what Preacher meant. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was erasure, and I wasn't about to let it erase us. Dawn crept over the battlefield, slow, pale, and cold. The fog lifted in thin strands, revealing the ruin left behind. The trench was a graveyard of mud, splintered wood, and bodies, ours and theirs tangled together. The air still reeked of cordite and blood. Wilson didn't make it through the night. He slipped away just before the sun broke, his breath fading against my hands. Preacher closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, his voice hoarse from smoke and shouting. Mills stood a little apart, staring blankly at the horizon, his uniform torn, his face gray. For once, he didn't have anything to say to me. Maybe he finally saw me, not just as a black soldier, not as a burden, but as a man who fought beside him, bled beside him, survived when survival seemed impossible. We were still alive, but survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like carrying a weight heavier than any pack or rifle. The weight of silence. Silence for the men we lost. Silence from the command that shelled us without care. Silence from a world that would never fully hear our story. I looked at my hands, caked with blood and dirt, and I swore that silence wouldn't be the last word, not for Wilson, not for any of us. Because when the artillery fell, the world tried to erase us, but we held. We endured. We lived to tell it. And if you're here, listening, help me break that silence. Share this story. Subscribe to the channel, leave your voice in the comments. Every word you write helps carry these men forward, make sure they're not forgotten in the mud and smoke of history. The silence before the artillery fell almost buried us, but together we can make sure silence never wins.